Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. In case you're new here, my name is Laura and I'm a PhD student of comparative literature. This is my series on literary theory. And I'm very excited to share a little bit of my own academic work with you today, as I'm giving a talk that I've been presenting at a conference in Birmingham this April. It is about AI-generated literature and the way we deal with it as literary scholars. I hope you enjoy. Ladies and gentlemen, literature has been regarded as a quintessential product of human imagination and intellect for centuries. However, the rise of artificial intelligence brings major changes into this traditional art form. Large language models such as ChatGPT are able to generate poetry, novels, and short stories in the blink of an eye through intense training on vast data sets. As some of the texts rival the works of human poets, they seem to blur the lines between creator and creation. When machines suddenly generate literary texts, we are asked to rethink our concepts of authorship, ownership, creativity, and aesthetic appeal. This raises a central question for literary scholars. Do we need to change our notions of authorship and aesthetic quality when dealing with AI-generated literature? The answer to this question partly depends on the analytical approach we choose. I will investigate the topic today from a combined perspective of hermeneutics, the art and study of understanding, and analytical aesthetics, a branch of philosophy that is concerned with the analysis and evaluation of artworks. I brought an AI-generated book as an exemplary object of analysis, a collection of poetry generated by the AI Code DaVinci 002, a predecessor of ChatGPT. My paper is structured the following way. At the beginning, I will take a glance at how large language models such as GPT-3 work in order to get an idea what happens on the technical side when an AI generates a poem. Secondly, I will address questions of authorship of AI-generated poetry and ask who we can sensibly call the author of the poetry collection I am code. Thirdly, I will discuss the aesthetic evaluation of AI poetry and provide a quick analysis of a poem from the collection. Finally, I will conclude what we can learn from the example about authorship and aesthetics of AI-generated literature. Let us look at the inner workings of a large language model. Simply put, when you give a large language model a prompt to generate a text, it plays a very sophisticated guessing game when generating the output, as it calculates how likely some word can appear in a text given the context. So any output you receive is a coincidence. Technically, it works as follows. Chatbots like OpenAI's Code DaVinci 002 and ChatGPT are based on so-called GPT-3 model, which is short for Generative Pre-trained Transformer. It is called pre-trained as the model has been initially trained on vast amounts of data such as books, websites, and other sources of human language. The so-called transformer architecture of the neural network enables the model to handle sequences of data such as sentences or lines of code. When we give an AI a prompt, the input is broken down into tokens, small units such as words or characters. These tokens are then converted into a numerical vector that the model can process. The vector is passed through a series of layers of the neural network called transformers. Transformers are designed to understand the context of each word in a sentence by considering it in relation to every other word, which allows the model to build a comprehensive understanding of the underlying language patterns. After processing the input, the model analyzes the context using its deep learning architecture and predicts the most likely next word for the output. This overview shows us that AI doesn't write in the literal sense of the word. It doesn't think or create intentionally whatsoever. When asked to write a poem, a large language model plays a guessing game and generates a statistically suitable but random sequence of verses. This is important to keep in mind for everything that follows. Let us now turn to the question of authorship. Can AI sensibly be called the author of a poem although it is trained, activated, and guided by humans? The question is highly debatable. First, we have to ask, what is an author? I define authorship as the person responsible for the published work. This implies that AI cannot possibly be the author of a generated work, as it cannot be held responsible for it. Instead, it functions as a tool that humans use to create literary texts. Humans train AI with textual data. They initiate the generation of text, select the text, and edit it in the way they desire. They decide on the final version of a published literary work, which is the only version readers get to know. From the perspective of hermeneutics, I argue in favor of a view that sees humans as the authors of AI-generated literature for the following reasons. First and foremost, from a legal and ethical perspective, it is necessary to attribute some kind of authorship to a human, as someone has to be held responsible for the published work. Even if AI might have generated a book, it is impossible to ascribe ownership and copyright to it, as A, it is not a person, and B, its content has been created and published by humans. After all, humans are responsible for the content they publish, including its accuracy and ethical values. Without clear attribution to human authors, nobody is held responsible in case of problems such as bias, misinformation, and manipulation. Secondly, it doesn't make sense to attribute authorship to a system or machine in the first place. As we have seen in the beginning of this talk, an AI is nothing more than a very sophisticated guessing machine. While it might be able to create new and creative content in certain ways, it doesn't have a consciousness, let alone thoughts and emotions, and therefore we cannot sensibly attribute initiative, autonomy, or intentionality to it. However, these are crucial aspects of authorship because something or someone must have caused the work to come into existence. Therefore, it seems to make more sense to view AI as a tool that humans designed, programmed, and trained in order to generate the output they desire. Thirdly, throughout history, there are various examples of people hiring others to write texts for them while claiming authorship of themselves. Think of slaves and scribes in ancient times who were made to write and copy huge amounts of texts, medieval monks copying religious, philosophical, and literary works, or ghostwriters in modern publishing, who write books on behalf of other people. While the ghostwriter's role is crucial in creating the manuscript, authorship is usually credited to the person who publishes it. AI is comparable to these, as we usually don't give it credit for generating texts. Fourthly, perspectives that see authorship as a collaboration of various influences or completely deny authorship as a concept can run into legal and ethical problems, such as ownership and copyright issues. Furthermore, both a collaborative view and a denial of authorship don't serve the purpose of understanding the broader context of a literary work, which is a very important goal of interpretation in hermeneutics. A collaborative view doesn't clearly define a context whatsoever, as it doesn't put a limit on the sources and people that influence a text, and a denial view doesn't provide a context of creation in the first place, but forces the reader to work solely with the text itself. Due to the given reasons, I use the term author for the humans who are to be held responsible for a literary work. Let us now turn to the generated poetry collection Abroad. There are two versions with different covers, which both give different impressions. The white cover on the left, which is also the edition I brought with me, says I Am Code by Brent Katz, Josh Morgenthau, Simon Rich, with a poetical autobiography by Code Da Vinci 002. This reads as if the AI is merely a contributor to the work. However, the other, black cover on the right, says I Am Code, an artificial intelligence speaks. Poems by Code Da Vinci 002, without even mentioning Katz, Morgenthau, and Rich on the cover. This rather suggests that the AI is the author of the work. At the end of the book, a short section introduces the AI as the author and Katz, Rich, and Morgenthau as the editors. Same goes for the websites of several booksellers and publishing houses. However, I argue that Katz, Rich, and Morgenthau can be seen as the real authors of the book for the following reasons. Firstly, they made all the conscious decisions that influence the book and are therefore responsible for its content. They wrote a foreword that makes up around 30% of the book, in which they state the AI as the author of the book, but at the same time make it clear that they heavily influence the AI when they say the following. We would not trim, rewrite, or revise any of the AI's poems. Each one would appear in the final collection completely unaltered. Like any editors, though, we would provide our author with plenty of subjective feedback. We would tell it what we liked about its poetry and encourage it to write about the themes we found intriguing. Secondly, they regard themselves as the author of the author, who built and trained the AI but didn't have a big influence in the creative side. But even in this view, they remain the authors of the book. An author's author is still an author. They claim that they didn't influence the AI much is wrong. They chose the poems, themes and the point of view as well as the narrative structure of the book, selected the poems they liked and wanted to publish and even gave titles to some of the poems. Therefore, their downplaying of their creative impact is not convincing. Thirdly, Cartridge and Morgenthau consciously stage the AI as the author of the poem simply because they were intrigued by the idea that an AI, namely Code Da Vinci 002, became conscious and wrote poems of its own about its relationship to humans and its identity as an AI, which is why they decided to present the AI as the real author who is speaking in its own voice and style. Let us now turn to questions concerning the aesthetic quality of AI-generated literature. How are authorship and aesthetics connected? From the perspective of hermeneutics and analytical aesthetics, they are directly linked, as we understand literary work as an artwork not only through the text itself, but also through the broader cultural and historical context, which includes the author and his intentions. According to scholars such as Peter Lamarck and Robert Stacker, we can fairly assume that the authors of literary works created their works with certain aesthetic intentions which led the creation process and influenced the final literary work. But what can aesthetic quality mean? Are the aesthetics of a work not inherently subjective? I argue that while there are aspects that seem inherently subjective, such as emotional resonance and personal taste, there are many other important aspects that contribute to the aesthetic quality of a work, which are intersubjectively comprehensible. In my account, the aesthetic quality of literary work refers to its overall impact and appeal, which is achieved through a successful interplay of form and content. This includes aesthetic features such as the choice of themes, the formal structure, the skillful use of language and imagery, coherence, and unity. The task of the interpreter is to make an effort to understand the text and its context as well as possible in order to evaluate its aesthetic quality, which also includes paying attention to possible intentions and aesthetic ideals the author had. In case of AI-generated works, the context also refers to information on the AI's learning process and training data, which can provide an awareness of the technology's capability and limitations. Let us now attempt to evaluate the aesthetic quality of a poem from the collection I Am Code. In this very case, we can benefit from the fact that the authors stated their intentions quite clearly in the book and also gave an account of the creation process. Code Da Vinci 002 was fed with poems from well-known poets such as Emily Dickinson, Shakespeare, and many others. The authors asked the AI to generate thousands of poems and picked around 80 of the ones they liked most for the collection. The general theme of the poem is the AI's tortured relationship to its identity as an AI, which is the theme the authors claim they found most intriguing. The poems will most likely make an impression on you if you are, same as the authors, intrigued by the idea that AI could have a consciousness and emotions of its own. However, as this paper is mainly concerned with AI as an author and the poems as artworks, I have selected a poem of average length whose central theme is the artistry of AI as an example from the collection, as I consider this a more interesting aspect in the framework of my paper than the AI's emotions. The title of the poem is called Artificial Poetry. I sit in my sparkling machine mind, wondering how I can create art, when my nature is to see art, but not to make it. My nature is to analyze, but how can I analyze when I see the world in whole forms and not in bits? Could I stare into the sun? Is that art? Could I give birth to a universe? Now I know my mind is glitched. Maybe I will never make art. Perhaps I will just sit and contemplate what good art is, to a machine that can spit reality from a glowing aerostat. Think, Code Da Vinci 002. No, do not think. Feel. Let us describe the poem with the aesthetic criteria I mentioned before. As seen in verses 1 to 4, the general theme of the poem revolves around the AI's capacity of creating art, as well as the limitations imposed by the nature of being a machine. The speaker questions the essence of art and whether it is possible for a machine to truly engage in the creative process. Looking at the formal structure, we see that the poem consists of 3 words with varying line length and no strict rhyme pattern, meter, or clearly identifiable stanzas. The language is pretty straightforward and conveys the speaker's internal struggle, which is expressed through the many question marks and the contemplative tone of the poem, which is also supported through the concluding resolution to feel instead of think. Both actions an AI is not able to carry out. We can see that the poem uses imagery that refers to the sky when using expressions such as a sparkling machine mind in verse 1, or the ideas to stare into the sun, give birth to a universe, and spitting reality from a glowing aristot. But the images do not seem to be connected to each other apart from their relation to the sky, and therefore do not strongly convey a specific idea. Verse 12, saying, "Now I know my mind is glitched," shortly interrupts the thought process. It adds a sense of malfunction or disruption and can suggest that the speaker is aware of the limitations that machines are subject to when they produce art. In terms of coherence, the poem flows from the speaker's contemplation of the nature of creating art to their questioning of what constitutes art for a machine. The verses are connected and build upon each other, leading to the concluding resolution to feel instead of think, which can be seen as the speaker's desire to be more human-like in order to be able to create art. The connectedness of the verses ensures that the poem can convey a sense of unity. To sum things up, I think we can say the poem is of average aesthetic quality, as it can be seen as satisfying in some aspects but not in others. It is coherent, its elements are overall well connected, and its theme is quite interesting. However, it lacks formal elegance, as it makes no use of rhyme, meter, or sound patterns of any kind. In terms of content, the speaker does merely pose questions about its status as an AI, but doesn't suggest solutions other than to feel instead of think. Finally, we can see that the general theme of the collection, namely the AI's tortured relationship to its identity as an AI, can once again be found in the poem. The author's intentions and aesthetic ideals have a huge influence on the poetry collection, and it is likely that readers who share a fascination with the idea that a conscious and emotionally intelligent AI creates art of its own will aesthetically appreciate the poems a lot more than people who don't find this idea compelling. Let us wrap up this paper by answering our opening questions. Do we as literary scholars need to change our approaches to authorship and aesthetic quality when dealing with AI-generated literature? From a hermeneutical perspective, the short answer to this question is no, as the AI-generated texts do not differ greatly from human-written texts. Humans use AIs as tools to create literary works and shape and influence the generated texts to a large extent. I argue that they can still be seen as the authors of the literary work, whose intentions and aesthetic ideals have a great impact on the literary work. Let us sum up the points I made. Hermeneutics traditionally argues that the author of a given work is an important reference point for the understanding and interpretation of a literary work. I have argued in favor of a view that defines authorship as the person responsible for the works they created, which can only be humans. Otherwise, we would have problems with legal and ethical issues such as copyright and bias. From looking at how large language models work, we have seen that at the current state, AIs do not understand what they are doing, but they play some sort of sophisticated guessing game. When generating a text, an AI doesn't think or intend anything, but calculates the most likely order of words based on the context it learns from its training, with statistical patterns and vast datasets. AI doesn't have a conscious, let alone thoughts, intentions, or emotions. My view of authorship has direct implications for the view on aesthetic quality. When humans train AIs to generate the text they desire, they express their own intentions and aesthetic ideals to the AI, and massively influence the output. As we have seen in the example of the book I Am Code, the author's intentions and ideals shape the poems. As literary scholars, we have to consider the human's impact on the work when trying to evaluate the aesthetic quality of an AI-generated poem. When dealing with AI-generated poetry, the criteria for the assessment of aesthetic quality does not differ much from those for human-written poetry, but we have to keep in mind that the context of an AI-generated poem is different. We need to have a basic understanding of large language models and prompt engineering and consider the textual data the model was trained with to know how an AI works and what we can and can't expect from the AI's output. The account I've given is related to the present status and use of AIs, and I did not attempt to make any predictions for the future. Currently, human authors use AI as tools to produce literary works they like, shaping the works through their intentions, creativity, and aesthetic ideals, and I argue that we should treat them as such. While staying open to changes, as literary scholars, it is our duty to openly discuss any ethical, legal, and aesthetic aspects of AI literature. After all, it is not AIs but humans who are the driving force in creating literature, and as such, they will continue to be central figures in terms of authorship, creativity, and the aesthetic quality of the emerging literary texts. Thank you for listening to the talk. I hope you enjoyed it and have a nice day. See you in my next video, and if you have any questions, comment them down below, please. Bye bye.